You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
Could I do 40, 50, 60 years of work in this sector? And the answer definitely was yes, if it's to do with combating climate change and being on the right side of the fight against global warming. Enhanced rock weathering, the aim of it is to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need to do this to reduce global warming because we've emitted too much CO2. That's a pretty obvious challenge that everyone is familiar with. It makes it a lot easier to break into new jurisdictions and set up pilots in new countries where we wouldn't have otherwise thought about going. The challenge for us is to be able to put our facts where our mouth is, be able to prove all of these things that we kind of see are happening.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Sam Davies, CEO and co-founder of Flux, a company that removes CO2 from the atmosphere and restores farmers' soils by accelerating our planet's natural processes. Flux uses enhanced rock weathering to capture and store CO2. Welcome to the podcast, Sam. How are you?
Thanks very much. Yeah, great intro. I'm very good, thank you. Yeah.
Pleasure to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to having this conversation. It's not a conversation I've had before. Very unique, very niche, very specific. So to get us started, I was hoping you could give us an introduction into who Sam Davies is.
To start with, from the UK, grew up in North Yorkshire in England, and then started my career in the British Army. So I did 6 years as an officer in a reconnaissance regiment, and then left it in 2020, became a freelance photographer and filmmaker for a couple of years, which was great fun, good antidote to a lot of the things that the military is. I had freedom, creativity. It was great fun being an entrepreneur and just making my own living. But then kind of realized a few things were missing. One was I wanted to be back in teams and leading teams and building teams again. And the second was the sort of higher purpose that you get with being in the military and that you get with working on projects that you really, really believe in outside of that. So it's kind of that mindset that led me into working in climate and the start of Flux.
Great, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So what was the spark that led you from reconnaissance in the British Army to, I guess, enhanced rock weathering in Africa?
I think a lot of people that leave the army have the same bit where you leave, you do something, and then after a couple of years, you kind of look around, you're like, wow, actually now I understand the real world a little bit and I need to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my career. And for me, it was really obvious that the thing I was most passionate about was climate change. And it was the only thing that I could look ahead and think, well, could I do 40, 50, 60 years of work in this sector? And the answer definitely was yes, if it's to do with combating climate change and being on the right side of the fight against global warming. So that was the kind of the mindset. And then I thought, well, if I were to pick myself up and put myself down somewhere and be the most useful possible in this fight, it is a big fight, essentially the biggest challenge of our time. I think I'm most useful in small organizations that move quickly, that solve problems. So yeah, being in a startup or leading a startup was the obvious choice. And from there, kind of looked into what new technologies and new companies were coming out of the space that could have a massive impact over the next 20 years. And carbon removal as a whole sector just kind of stood out for this combination of tech and innovation and the challenge of building companies like that, but also interactions with the natural world and real life scenarios, whether that's farmers or communities. And so, yeah, when I sort of wrap all those things up together, I mean, it's not like rock weathering was the obvious choice, but those things all kind of pointed me towards being part of a solution like enhanced rock weathering.
So we've kind of spoke about enhanced rock weathering. Maybe if we can take a few steps back for listeners who don't understand what enhanced rock weathering is, can you explain it to us in layman's terms?
Yeah, that's fair enough. It is pretty niche and I forget how deep into it I am sometimes. But essentially, enhanced rock weathering, the aim of it is to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need to do this to reduce global warming because we've emitted too much CO2, and so the Earth is heating up. So that's the pretty obvious challenge that everyone is familiar with. The way rock weathering works is essentially mimics a natural process that happens all around the world and has done for the entire history of the planet. Essentially, when rain falls to the Earth, it contains some dissolved carbon from the atmosphere, dissolved carbon dioxide. That rain comes into contact with rocks on the ground, and certain minerals in the rocks react with the carbon dioxide and essentially bind it into a solid, stable form of CO2. Currently, this captures around 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year around the world, just naturally as a process that happens on the planet. So what enhanced rock weathering is looking to do is just speed up that natural process. The very simple way that we do that is by taking rocks that work really well for this process, crushing them into small powders, and putting them places where the weathering or the dissolving of these rocks is going to be sped up. That's the sort of high level aim of what we're trying to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess the aim is carbon removal. So how does Flux's enhanced rock weathering approach differ from other carbon removal companies operating?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. The end goal is exactly the same, as many tons as possible out of the atmosphere. There's a few different ways to do it. There's very technical ways, which involve building machines, which are going to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And there's very nature-based ways like planting trees or regenerating ecosystems and letting nature take carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Rock weathering kind of sits halfway in between, and where it differentiates from some of these other pathways is probably how scalable it is. The operational side, what we actually have to do to implement this technology, is very straightforward and something that humans are very good at. Taking rock, crushing it, and spreading things on farmland. These are not revolutionary practices. In fact, everyone's very used to doing them, and it can be scaled up very quickly. So that's probably one of the key differentiators for enhanced rock weathering, or ERW as most people know it in this sector, is that the scalability ceiling is really, really high. We can do this on a massive, massive scale. And the secondary thing that kind of stands it out from some of the other pathways is the combination with farmers and farmland. So we spread the rock powders onto farms and farmland. And the secondary benefit beyond capturing the carbon is that when these rocks dissolve, they also improve soil health in a number of ways through pH and micronutrients and things like that. But overall, the impact is to increase farmers' yields. And so with ERW, you have this pretty unique combination of being able to capture carbon and improve farmers' livelihoods. And the whole thing can essentially be paid for by the carbon credits that are generated in the process.
So what would you say makes Africa uniquely suited or positioned for this process?
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, I absolutely believe it's the best continent in the world for carbon removal as a whole. And I think we'll see that play out over the next decade as just a huge number of project developers from all sorts of different pathways coming here. One of the reasons specific to rock weathering is the tropical climate that you get in equatorial Africa. So high rainfall and high temperature areas that also have very acidic soils. This is just the perfect environment to weather rocks, to speed up the weathering of rocks. The other one is the geology, which means some of the rock types that we're looking for are very abundant here, and there's a lot of people already quarrying them. And the third one is the huge amount of farmland that is all over countries like Kenya. And in Western Kenya, you can't drive down the road without going past a farm. And so that means you've got the perfect conditions to deploy lots of farmers that are very interested in receiving the product so that they can boost their yields. And you've got great rock powders, which are going to really be able to help people. So there's that side. I think also the other benefit of doing it here is the huge workforce that's available. Unemployment is certainly a massive issue in Kenya and is similar in a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And so you can tap into that by providing skilled labor, training, and a huge amount of jobs in a very scalable way at a very economical price point. And with carbon removal, it doesn't matter where in the world we do it. We can remove CO2 from any country, and it's going to reduce the atmospheric CO2 all around the world. And so it makes sense to do it in the place where it's most beneficial for the communities you're working with. It's most efficient in terms of the speed and the science behind the project. And it's the most economical in terms of scaling. So it really has a lot of benefits. And I think we'll see more and more companies coming into all the different pathways in a lot of different countries here.
You've touched on what makes Africa uniquely suited. In terms of your approach at Flux, how are you capitalizing on those natural advantages to enhance the work that you're doing?
So one of the things we do is on the natural side, natural product side, we do a lot of scientific testing in quarries and rock feedstocks to find the absolute best rocks that we can use that are more efficient for us and that help farmers better. So that's one of the things we do to capitalize here. And then the other side is tapping into the amazing young workforce that Kenya has available. There's a huge amount of skilled graduates that are incredibly motivated, incredibly passionate, and incredibly skilled that are looking for work. And that's where we go to boost our workforce. And like I'm in Nairobi at the moment. We also have labs on the other side of the country. And that's one of the things that gives us an advantage, is that we can bring in a lot of these incredible young people and boost our numbers really efficiently to make sure that we're growing as fast as we can and doing all the work that we need to do, but also doing it in a scientifically rigorous way and ensuring the quality of what we're doing doesn't dip. So I think that's one of the main ways we sort of leverage the benefits here. I mean, beyond that, it's just, for us, the fact it rains a lot and it's very hot, you're already starting from the best point in terms of the projects that we want to do.
I guess to enable this requires also collaborations and partnerships. You've mentioned the workforce element. I know you've also partnered with governments like Nigeria. So how critical are these collaborations to the success of carbon removal?
Yeah, massively crucial. You're absolutely right. And I think the governmental ones are probably some of the most important over the next 5 years. I think it's a relatively new sector and a lot of people haven't heard about it. Or if you say carbon to them, they will think of another form of carbon project like tree planting, or even some sort of carbon reduction project like a renewable energy project or something like that. And so these early partnerships with the governments are going to be really important, because ultimately they will be forming policies on carbon and carbon removal. And if they don't understand what rock weathering is, or what biochar, or what DAC, which are some of the other carbon removal pathways, if they don't understand what they are and how they're different, then the policies that are going to help this sector grow won't be put in place. So that is really, really important. And our partnership in Nigeria is amazing. I think that the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Technology there is super forward thinking and is looking for new technologies that are going to help solve some of Nigeria's challenges. The one that they're looking at specifically with us is food security and cassava yields across the country, and looking at different things that they can do to improve cassava yields. And if for them, rock weathering is a no-brainer, it makes sense that if we can supply these rock powders to farmers for free because we're generating carbon credits that someone else is going to buy, then they're massively behind that sort of project. And for us, it means having government sign off from the start makes it a lot easier to break into new jurisdictions and set up pilots in new countries where we wouldn't have otherwise thought about going.
You highlighted the importance of early partnerships with governments to enable you to meet some of the ambitious goals and targets that you have. I know you're aiming to remove, was it 1 billion tons of CO2?
That might be from an early deck. I think a lot of companies start out by saying things like 1 billion or 5 billion or 10 billion. And then I think what we want to do is get to hundreds of millions of tons across Africa. And that will be a significant part played in the final piece. So,
how close are you to that target, or what are some of the biggest milestones you've hit so far that you're proud of?
I mean, that target's a long way off, which is why it's a great target to have, because it's ambitious and big and motivating and also scary, which I think is what all great targets should be. Right now, our big milestones have been our early traction from pilots and some of the commercial traction we've had. So Flux has sold carbon credits to some of the biggest buyers in the space, including Google, Shopify, Stripe, and then in Europe, Klarna and Spotify, and are in discussion off the back of those with some of the other big corporate buyers. And so that's big milestones because most of those purchases are going to carbon removal companies that are based in the global north, the US or Europe, and very few have come to Africa. And so us pioneering that as well here is kind of what we see as part of our role, is showing that these sort of projects can be high enough quality and meet the requirements of these buyers and be developed in Africa. So that's one of the big milestones for us, I think, getting the commercial traction. Hopefully later this year, we'll be delivering some of our first credits to those suppliers. So obviously one credit is not very much out of 100 million, if that's what we want to achieve. But the first steps are going to be the hardest to make. And the exciting thing about enhanced rock weathering is that scalability that we heard about earlier. So even if it takes us a few years of really deep R&D and science work over the next few years, the pathway to scale after that is really steep. And we'll unlock that by doing the hard yards early on.
Welcome to Verto Corner, the segment powered by Verto, the cross-border payment platform transforming how businesses move money around the world. Today, we're asking, are stablecoins just a buzzword, or do they have real staying power in global finance and cross-border payments? Here to unpack the potential and the risks is George Antoniades, Product Manager at Verto. George, take it away.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me on. I think a good way to start is to really understand and lay out what stablecoins actually are. And in very simple terms, stablecoins are simply a token on a blockchain. And a blockchain you can think of as this internet of money. So just as the internet is this open global network for the 24/7 for an instant movement of information, blockchains are basically an open global network for the 24/7 near free, near instant movement of money. And it really kind of kicked off in 2015 with the launch of the Ethereum blockchain. People were creating all these different cryptocurrencies, and obviously they had a lot of price volatility. And so the company called Tether basically sat down and went, okay, we can combine the price stability of the dollar with the fast global aspect of crypto and basically issue these crypto tokens back to one. And they basically created these crypto dollars or stable coins that we have today. And so 5 or so years ago, there was about $10, $11 billion of these stable coins in circulation. And now today there's over $250 billion, and it's growing sort of 3, 4, 5% month on month. And when you really look at the kind of killer use case for stable coins, it's kind of important to look at what the least efficient payment systems are. And so if we first look at the most efficient, it's really these local payment networks. So the UK, we've got faster payments. Europe's got SEPA Instant. Nigeria's got NIP, NIBS Instant Payments. And so these payment systems are actually very efficient payment systems. So it's pretty much free and instant for the user to send payments within these systems. But the real challenge is that there's no interoperability between them. So I can't send from a faster payments in the UK to a SEPA Instant in Europe or to NIP in Nigeria. And so for cross-border payments, we're really stuck with this SWIFT and correspondent banking model, which was started in the 1970s and is still used today. And it's really not built for the global world. And so what stablecoins provide is an opportunity to basically bridge together these different local payment systems. And so you effectively have this blockchain global base layer, which is an open global network. It's 24/7. It runs like clockwork. It's not owned by a single, individual, government or corporate. So it's completely trusted by all the counterparties that use it. Then on top of that, you have this value layer, which is these stable coins, which enable money to be moved through this network. And then on top of that, you have these different local payment systems. So your faster payments, your SEPA Instant, your NIP, in all these different countries. And basically, stablecoins act as a way to bridge that together. And what that looks like in practice is basically if I want to send money from, Naira in Nigeria to GBP in the UK, I can send Naira over NIP near instantly to a local liquidity provider to convert it into USDT or USDC. I can send that near instantly to a liquidity provider in the UK who can convert it to GBP and then settle me instantly over faster payments. So it basically enables the ability to move money between all these different countries very, very quickly. And when you look at, cross-border payments company like Verto, it really makes it a very interesting asset for us to hold as a treasury asset, because we have the ability to hold stable coins and then liquidate into any fiat currency we want in minutes. So if we're sitting on a USDT treasury, we can send it to Nigeria, UK, Europe, Kenya, Tanzania, wherever our clients need to do payouts. And it really becomes a very efficient way to deploy our capital. And that's why we've really seen huge demand from our sort of fintech FI clients who are asking us to settle in stablecoins over a US dollar SWIFT, because it's much quicker for them to receive settlement from us. And then they have that complete flexibility to be able to convert it into any other currency they wish. The biggest use case is cross-border payments. And I think within that, the biggest use case is between transactions between other financial institutions.
Thanks for that overview, George. Definitely a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, just a question to hopefully build on the great insights you've already shared. Are there any specific industries or markets where you're seeing stablecoins make a tangible difference right now?
Yeah, the biggest use case is basically where there's a lack of accessibility to reliable banking, and in particular, sort of lack of accessibility to US dollars. The biggest demands in markets like Africa, Latin America, if you look at it from individuals, from a consumer point of view, the ability to open a blockchain wallet is very easy. You just need a mobile device, an internet connection, and you can download any blockchain wallet off the App Store for free. And you've got a wallet where you can send and receive stable coins instantly and for almost zero between anyone anywhere in the world. So there's definitely use cases in the remittance market, and just the ability to hold a US dollar denominated asset versus these local currencies in these regions where they can be very volatile and depreciate very quickly. And then even in the kind of business point of view, it's very much financial institutions transacting with each other. I think it will be this kind of plumbing of the global financial system where you'll see more and more US dollar transactions via stable coins, particularly in the global world where if we want to send money from our, bank in the UK to a bank in Singapore and it's out of banking hours, that transaction may not settle till the next day. So the ability to have this, very reliable network to transact US dollars 24/7 is very valuable for financial institutions in particular.
Thanks again to George and the team at Verto for powering this episode of Verto Corner. We'll be back with more next week. See you then. And now back to our interview. Another milestone or achievement I read about is that you've enabled a 71% average yield increase in Kenyan farmers, which is remarkable. So from that perspective, I guess the agricultural perspective, how do you balance the dual goals of climate impact and also farmer prosperity?
Thanks for reminding me of that one. Probably should have brought that up as well.
No problem.
That was amazing, actually. And follow on from that study, we took those measurements in June last year, and the farmers are currently harvesting again, finishing off their harvest, and the indications look fantastic for the second year in a row, which is also super exciting. So we'll publish some more data on that. I think for us, it's almost not even about balancing, because it's not a question of one or the other, or should we have more carbon impact or more impact with farmers. It happens simultaneously. One of the things we do think about is working both with smallholder farmers and also commercial farms. And so they're kind of different funding streams for us. And you can have more community and social impact on the smallholder farms in terms of that yield increase going directly to the farmer and providing more subsistence or more cash for those farmers. But one of the things we also want to do is make sure we're getting really good at monitoring that. It's like 71% yield increase is a good headline figure, amazing headline figure. But we want to be able to say, well, what does that mean to a community if we can provide that every year over a 5-year period? Does that mean more kids are going to school? Does that mean nutrition levels are going up in the community? Does that mean there's better access to water because people have clubbed together and spent money on infrastructure? These are some of the things we're hearing anecdotally from these farmers, but we don't yet have the data to back it up. And so that's a big challenge for us, is to be able to, put our facts where our mouth is, so to speak, and be able to prove all of these things that we kind of see are happening, but then are going to be delivered alongside the carbon benefit.
Fantastic. Earlier on, you mentioned Flux's carbon credits. I was wondering if we could go back to that in terms of how does a carbon credit process work?
Yeah, you could do a whole podcast series about this, I think.
Definitely.
It's a complicated world. And it's been going for a while, so it can be very confusing. And I empathize with anybody who's sort of getting to grips with it to begin with. Essentially, a carbon credit in the simplest terms means 1 ton of carbon dioxide either removed from the atmosphere or stopped from entering the atmosphere. So there's loads of different ways that you could generate that, different pathways, different measurement techniques, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been going on for quite a while now. In terms of carbon removal and what we do, it's very much one credit is that we've taken 1 ton of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We then sell these credits to either companies, and in the future also countries will be able to buy them, and they can use them to offset any emissions they have left on their books. The general principle is that it's the most important thing we need to do first is reduce emissions. Like, companies need to do everything they can to reduce the amount of CO2 they're putting into the atmosphere through their normal daily operations. But there will always be some residual element of emissions left at the end. And that is why we need carbon removals and why we'll need it at much bigger scale in the future. And so these carbon removal credits aren't a ticket to carry on polluting without having to do reductions. Most of the targets and the goals that companies are setting bake into themselves that you have to do reductions first. And also, it's going to be more expensive to do high quality carbon removals like Flux does than it is to simply reduce your emissions by improving efficiency or moving to green energy or things like that. So that's how carbon credits work on the removal side. Yeah. And for Flux, that's our revenue model. So from the business side of Flux, that's the way that we generate income into the business, and it then pays for all of our operations. So sourcing the rock and transporting it, spreading it, doing all the testing and analysis that we have to do is all paid for by the sale of that carbon credit. So the farmers never have to pay for the rock. They just have to participate in the program. They get the benefits of having the rock on their land, and they also get access to all the soil testing and analysis that we do as well.
So what is the actual verification process or protocol to ensure that the reductions are accurate or taking place?
Yeah, it's a super important part. So this is done by third-party bodies, as you would hope. So it's not just Flux saying, yep, we've done it, take our word for it, and we'll print loads of credits. We do lots of measurements in the field. We take soil samples and water samples, and do modeling of what happens downstream and wrap all that together. We also measure all of our emissions that are involved in the process. So from crushing the rock and transporting it, that all burns fuel. And so we measure that very carefully. We take those amounts off whatever we've captured. And then we send all this data to a third-party registry. There's quite a few out there in the carbon markets. Some of the bigger ones in nature-based solutions, Vera or Gold Standard, a lot of people will have heard of those. And some of the newer ones doing carbon removal is Isometric or Puro. We basically send all our data to them and have taken the measurements in line with their protocol, which is then also certified by other bodies. And then they come back to us and say, yeah, here you go. You have now captured X tons of carbon according to our protocol. We've verified all of your data, and now we can issue those credits to some of the people.
So what has been the general uptake or interest from people with regard to the carbon credit scheme?
The interest is growing a lot. I mean, in carbon credits in general, it's widely popular. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's millions and millions of these things are being traded and being used every year at the moment. And it's a pretty much part of every large corporate strategy now, and it filters down. And then in terms of carbon removal credits, like enhanced rock weathering, this is just starting to become a new trend for these companies. And most will take a portfolio approach. They'll take some credits from different pathways like forestry or emissions reductions or enhanced rock weathering, and they'll build a portfolio of these credits, just like you would build a portfolio of investments. So you have diversified risk and different plus points. But the popularity is growing considerably. I think if you look at things like biochar, the supply is way behind the demand already. And as you look into 2030, that constraint is just going to get even tighter for biochar, for enhanced rock weathering. And so it's becoming quite a popular method for these companies. And the main reason for that is something I've touched on already, like the quality. What do I mean by quality? Essentially, if you buy a carbon credit, how likely is it that the project has really delivered that turn and that it's not going to be reversed? And how permanent is that removal from the atmosphere? And so when you look at enhanced rock weathering, we have very low reversibility. It's pretty much impossible that the carbon will be reversed or re-released into the atmosphere. And we have a long degree of permanence over 1,000 years, which gives companies great confidence that what they're purchasing is actually going to be properly offsetting their residual emissions.
So if we look at the carbon credit, ERW, and the general work that you do, what would you say has been some of the most surprising reactions when people kind of discover or see the implementation of your work?
I think the biggest challenge we have is that it sounds too good to be true. Often when I'm telling people about it, they're like, well, sure, but what's the real story? Where's the catch? What's the problem? And, it's great if we can do something that benefits farmers and captures carbon and everyone wins. That is the potential of ERW. I think the other surprising thing we've had from farmers is a really positive response. And when I started the company, certainly a lot of people here in Kenya warned me that farmer adoption would be very tricky. It would be one of the challenges. But we've kind of seen the opposite, which has been really surprising, in that almost every farmer we've spoken to and told about the concept, what we're doing, what we want to put on the fields, pretty much all been incredibly receptive. And we're now way oversubscribed from farmers on the ground in terms of the projects we're doing, because I think it does resonate with people. Like farmers are in general sick of having to buy expensive synthetic fertilizers that come from around the world where they don't know what's in the bag and it's a chemical that they've just been sold and they don't really know what impact it has, but they're often too scared to stop using it because everyone else is using it. And when you say you've got a natural rock powder that is just crushed from somewhere in Kenya, put in bags and taken to the field, and it's not going to do the same as a fertilizer, but it's going to slowly improve soil health for generations, it kind of makes sense to people, and the reception has been really great. So that's probably been one of the surprising things in a positive way for us when we've been speaking to people on the ground here.
You mentioned something quite interesting, that you were warned that farmer adoption would be tricky. What's one thing you wish the average person understood about climate solutions like enhanced rock weathering?
Good question. I think one thing that I wish the average person understood about climate solutions is that we desperately need them. This isn't just going to happen overnight by accident without a lot of people putting in the effort to build it and support it and be part of that movement. And so it's easy to kind of sit back and say, well, someone else is going to solve this, or I'm sure someone's working on the solutions. It's not true. We need everybody who believes that climate change is real to turn some part of their attention and capacity towards helping to build these solutions, and they really can help and make a massive difference. And you don't have to have any previous experience in climate or carbon to be incredibly valuable. So yeah, that's sort of I guess, something I wish people knew, and a bit of a call to action for everybody is that, yeah, we need you.
Brilliant. As you mentioned, we desperately need these solutions, and it is a space that is quickly evolving as we discuss things such as carbon credits, which are quite new but are gaining pace. So are there any current trends or solutions that you're currently seeing in how carbon removal is happening that you're quite excited about?
There's definitely a trend towards projects in the global south in Africa and in India and in other areas. And I think that's incredibly positive. I think 5 years ago, there was almost no suppliers in these countries, and now it's growing. So I think that's a really exciting trend because it unlocks all the benefits we talked about earlier. And then I think the second one is just, the growing awareness of these solutions and the possibilities that they bring, I think is also super encouraging. But I would also say it's still not enough. I think, like we're in this bubble where the danger is we pat ourselves on the back a bit and say, great, we're doing carbon removal. But one of our big challenges is making sure that everyone else is aware of these solutions. And it's not just carbon removal. Like we obviously need to do a whole load of other things. As I've spoken about, reducing emissions is really critical. There's lots of new technologies for doing that. I think improving efficiencies using AI is exciting. But we have to, while there are definitely a lot of positives, I think it's important also to just keep in the back of the mind, like we need to keep doing more. Momentum is nice and optimism is good, but we've got to really push it.
Thank you for that. So if we move from current trends and look at the future, in 5 years' time, where do you think the carbon removal industry will be in Africa?
It will be massive. I think it'll be a huge part of the economies of a lot of African nations. And I think Kenya will lead the way on that due to its pretty progressive policy and the fact that it's quite well advanced on the understanding of these technologies. So I think, what will that look like? I think there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of carbon removal companies across the continent, across various pathways. And I think it'll be very commonplace for decentralized projects like biochar communities to be taking place all over Africa. And I think on a rock weathering standpoint, it will be very normal to see trucks carrying fresh rock powder from quarries and distributing it on farmlands and restoring people's soils. And I think those businesses and operations will just pop up all over the continent as word spreads, the science becomes a bit more demystified and the tools become available to help people do that. I think that's what we'll see for carbon removal in Africa. And on the global scale, I think that Africa will supply most of the world's carbon removal credits. Maybe not by 2030, but I think probably by 2035.
If we look closer to home, where do you see Flux in the next 5 to 10 years? What role will you be playing in the carbon removal space in Africa?
Yeah, it's a good question. And then we kind of changed our mind on it regularly over the last 2 years, as probably most startups do when you're trying to figure out exactly which part you play. For us, the biggest challenge with rock weathering is the measuring of the carbon that's captured and gathering that data in a really transparent and streamlined way, and then passing it on to these verifiers. And so because that's the biggest challenge, we think that's where we can add the biggest value. And so Flux will be focused on building the measurement tools, the models, the simulations, and the software that allow anyone across Africa to just go and do enhanced rock weathering, whether that's a quarry owner in Ghana or an entrepreneur in Uganda or anyone else in between who thinks, well, I can move some rock from this place onto this farm. How do I get credits to do that? We can then come in and provide them with the tools to actually do that in a scientifically sound way, generate the credits, help them sell credits if that's needed, and basically catalyze the scaling of this sector across the continent. And so that's where Flux is aiming. And I think in 5 years, we'll be a couple of years into rolling out those partnerships across a few different countries.
Quote of the week.
Last question. It's different to all the other questions, but I do ask every single guest this question. It's, as people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Oh, that's a good question. I have lots that pop into my head every now and then, but yeah, one of them that always comes back is, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I think that's super important to kind of, guide on what we spend our time in our lives doing. Like if you believe in climate change and you stand for a world where we're not destroying the planet, then you need to keep standing up for that, and you need to make sure that that's actually a part of what you do, because if we don't stand up for that, then we'll just fall for all the same old things that have got us into this mess. So yeah, it's a cheesy one, I guess. Probably a few of your guests have said that already, but
no.
It's the one that popped into my mind first.
No. I like that one. Definitely, I believe you have to stand for something, and it's a great way to end today's conversation. Thank you, Sam, for sharing your journey and the work Flux is doing to fight climate change and also at the same time uplift communities. I think from my perspective, it's great to see how science, entrepreneurship and also social impact can come together with such purpose. So yeah, thank you. It's been an enjoyable conversation, and I'll be watching out and seeing how things progress at Flux.
Thanks very much, Tessa. Thanks for having me. It's been great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, man.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.